established in 1905 and re-edited in 1938, has certainly been used as a guide to Hannah Arendt's own analysis, because he gave us Arendt herself in a note on the page 147, a masterly analysis of the driving economic forces and motives, as well as of some of the political implications, but simultaneously, since our argument, she has also been influenced, especially in her economic and political analysis, by Rudolf Hilferding and Rosa Luxemburg. But by the periods, Arendt is referring to the historical period spanning from 1884 until 1814, i.e. his 30 years in European history, which were characterized by a continuous process of capitalist accumulation in the great industrial countries of Europe, and by a great movement in private investments in foreign undeveloped countries, such as Africa, and by the significant enlargement at the same time of the European colonial empires, mainly of the British Commonwealth and the French colonial empire in Africa. Carried by the movement of the political emancipation of the bourgeoisie throughout the whole 19th century, especially after the Revolution of February 1848 in France, this movement of extension was, in the eyes of Hannah Arendt, the decisive factor leading to the extension in this period, visible by the outbreak of the First World War, of colonialist rule, mainly of British, French, and German capitalism in Africa and in Asia, which in the next little bit Portuguese colonialism. Concretely, what this meant was that the European bourgeoisie was no longer content to accumulate capital under the benign non-interference of the state, and instead seized the reins of the state power for the purpose of expanding investments abroad. And even if her analysis of imperialism is not Marxist in the common meaning of the word, it cannot be denied that wherever Arendt is analyzing the process of accumulation and expansion of capitalism in the context of this constant growth of capitalism during the period of imperialism, her analysis is often in certain respects rather close to the Marxist point of view. So this is not a pure coincidence that in her book Arendt is frequently quoting not only Hudson, but also the Austrian socialist Rudolf Hilferding and Rosa Luxemburg. In this connection, it would be very instructive to refer to the pages 147 to 152 of the origins of totalitarianism. So we will find a direct confirmation of Arendt's interest in the series of these with two eminent representatives of socialism and Marxism in the first decade of the 20th century, who both dedicated important studies and books to the phenomenon of imperialism in the framework of a very profound economic analysis. Arendt's interest in Hilferding and Rosa Luxemburg may also be determined by the fact that both theories, in spite of their attachment to the methods of the historical and dialectical materialism, express criticisms of Marx. Indeed, Hilferding, in his book The Financial Capital, 1910, very often refers to Ricardo and to his theory of the proportional reproduction, pretending that all spheres of the capitalist production have the same possibilities of enlargement and extension, a theory which was rejected by Marx. This same theory of proportionality also leads Hilferding to have doubts and misgivings regarding the Marxist theory of the collapse of capitalism, and to maintain that it is not a very rational idea. But Hilferding is not only relativizing the Marxist theory of the crash of the capitalist economy as an inevitable result of the cyclic crisis of overproduction and self-consumption, but he is also convinced that the Marxist equation, constant capital with violent capital increasing value, as Marx is demonstrating it in the first volume of the Capital, does not necessarily lead to a crisis of overproduction, because the production can be extended infinitely and is therefore limitless. It would seem that Arendt's long reflection on this extension as the main concept for the explanation of the phenomenon of imperialism is founded and inspired by this theory of the infinite progress of capitalist production founded by Hilferding, and that she is all referring Hilferding is a theory that this capitalist expansion to the underworld countries of the world is the main feature of capitalism. According to Hilferding, for the great financial capital, the question is now to obtain possession of the resources of raw materials and to obtain domains of privileges, investment in the low developed countries where the state, the low cost of labor, and so on, guarantees super profits. Is that the reason why Hilferding has put an accent upon the exploitation of bank capitals, on the search of super profits, on the policy of protectionism, on the will to secure worldwide monopolies, and the transference of the competition on an international scale. This is a veritable consequence of his conviction that the constant growth of capital is the very essence of the 20th century's capitalism, and that this will be especially in the form of the permanent export of capital, the real origin of modern imperialism. In other words, imperialism, the worldwide extension of capital in the colonies or in the hegemonic spheres, is the modern political expression of a new economic fact which contrasts with the liberalism of the 19th century. Hannah Arendt is evidently precisely on the same wavelength when she asserts that after the financiers had opened the channels of capital export to the superfluous wealth, which had been condemned to idleness within the narrow framework of national production, it quickly became apparent that the absentee shareholders did not care to take the tremendous risk which corresponded to their tremendously enlarged profit. Against these risks, the commission-earning financiers, even with the benevolent assistance of the state, did not have enough power to induce them. Only the material power of the state could do that. Hannah Arendt's special interest in Rosa Luxemburg's theory of imperialism is attested by a paragraph of the last subsection of chapter 5 of The Burden of Our Time, where she directly refers to the central thesis of Rosa Luxemburg that capitalism is not a closed system, and that the process of capitalist accumulation and also its eventual collapse depends upon external factors. With this statement, that the growth of capitalist accumulation is impossible in the mere framework of a closed economy, Rosa Luxemburg contested the Marxist theory of the enlarged reproduction of the capital. And for this refutation, she was indeed severely criticized by Lenin, who considered this descent to be a fundamental error. As Hannah Arendt remarks, the problem is that this error for the proponent of Marxist theory was an exact description of the things as they had happened in reality. The description of the torture of the black population in South Africa was also not Marxist. But who could seriously contest today that it has its real place in a book on imperialism? Alluding to this controversy, Arendt praises in an important annotation on page 148 of her book on imperialism, Rosa Luxemburg's brilliant insight into the political structure of imperialism, stressing that the historical process of the accumulation of capital depends in all its aspects upon the existence of non-capitalist social strata, so that imperialism is the political expression of the accumulation of capital in its competition for the possession of the remainder of the non-capitalist world. But the reading of subsequent paragraphs reveals clearly that in her deeper analysis of this phenomenon, Arendt trusts much more to Hudson and to Hilferding, whose books are frequently quoted, than to Rosa Luxemburg's The Accumulation of the Capital, which is only quoted twice on page 148. But in her important essay on Rosa Luxemburg, published in Men in Dark Times, Hannah Arendt testifies again her great admiration for this woman, which she calls a quite marginal figure, even in the European socialist movement, which relative short moments of splendor and great radiation, and the most controversial and least understood personality of the German left. In this essay, a recension of the biography of Nettle of Rosa Luxemburg, which was published in the New York Review of Books in 1966, she calls Rosa Luxemburg's book, The Accumulation of Capital, published in 1930, paraphrasing Franz Mehring, a really marvelous and fascinating achievement and a work of a genius, stressing Luxemburg's internationalism, her polyglottism, her radical hostility to all forms of nationalism. She identifies in Rosa Luxemburg's political thought only one great error, the error of not having understood the importance of the national question. Because it was undoubtedly the nationalism that caused the decline of the nation state during the period of imperialism. And only a small minority, let's just say the true Europeans, among the Central European Jews, Hannah Arendt, had really been able to recognize the disastrous consequences of this nationalism, so radically being criticized by Nietzsche in the form of the pan-German nationalism, which is also the target of Arendt's criticism for future, even as they were unable to evaluate correctly the enormous force of the nationalist sentiment inside of a political core in decomposition. As regards the great controversy on revisionism in the German Social Democratic Party, the paradox of Arendt's position is that she is simultaneously defending Bernstein and Rosa Luxemburg in spite of their antagonistic political positions, defending Bernstein's reformism against the position of the left-wingers in the SPD. Arendt underlines that Bernstein's criticism of Marx were in total accord with the reality, and that the advantage of Bernstein's revisionism had been to really integrate the SPD, a workers' party, into German society. Bernstein was convinced that the working class should be emancipated within the framework of bourgeois capitalist society. He announced the end of the discussions of a revolution in which nobody, as he said, believed anymore. But these positions were severely rejected and criticized by Plekhanov, Pavus, and also by Rosa Luxemburg. According to Hannah Arendt, the great merit of Nettle was to have pointed out in his biographies that the central historical event for Rosa Luxemburg's vision of the nature of political action was the Russian Revolution of 1905, in which she personally assisted, and where the first workers' councils were created, historical events where she learned that a good organization is not receiving the action, but it is its result that the organization of revolutionary action can be experienced in the revolution itself, and that the forces pushing to the revolutionary action were always coming from below. But in Hannah Arendt's judgment, Rosa Luxemburg had not sufficiently taken into account the fact that the Russian Revolution was mainly the result of the Russian defeat in the Russian-Japanese War, whereas Lenin was perfectly conscious of this and took account of this event. Rosa Luxemburg was also very skeptical about the Leninist and Bolshevik highly centralized and disciplined organization, and she was, as Arendt stresses, considerably more fearful of a deformed and degenerated revolution than of a failed revolution. As Arendt underlines at the end of her essay on Rosa Luxemburg, the evolution of the Russian Bolshevik Revolution towards Stalin's bureaucratic dictatorship validated these fears. It confirmed also that the moral collapse of the Russian Revolution, which she predicted, would seriously damage the image of socialist and communism, principally because of the non-respect of the Republican principles of freedom, liberty of expression, association, liberty of the press, and so on, and of human rights. As Elisabeth Jung-Brühl stresses, Arendt puts the question of the Republic at the very center of her examination of the political ideas of Rosa Luxemburg, and it was in the light of Luxemburg's theory of imperialism that in 1966 she also judged critically the American military intervention in Vietnam, which was intensifying when she wrote her essay on revolution. It's quite conceivable that Rosa Luxemburg and also Rudolf Efferding's criticism of Marx greatly inspired Hannah Arendt's desire to surpass all these critics by her own rigorous critique of Marx's concept of work, of labor, in her book The Human Condition. This shift, this evolution into an always more critical view of Marx was also certainly encouraged by Arendt's second husband, Heinrich Blücher, who taught in the Barth College until his death in 1970, and who was a Spartacus activist in Berlin when he was 20 years old, and who was later a dissident communist belonging to the anti-Stalinist Brandler faction, who founded the KPD Aufbauorganisation close to the Trotskyists, and was an ardent reader of Rosa Luxemburg, Trotsky, and Bukharin. And as it is attested by the common cause of Heinrich Blücher, which was first published in the St. Stephen's Alumni magazine of the Barth College in February 1968, when republished in annex to the correspondence of Hannah Arendt with her second husband, whom she beat in Paris in 1936, Heinrich Blücher shifted finally to skeptical anti-Marxist positions during his exile in the United States. As Elisabeth Jung-Brühl emphasizes, Heinrich Blücher was not an intellectual, but he was a man of action, and his practical philosophy of action certainly influenced Hannah Arendt's reflections on action of man in liberty, in the plurality of the public space, and in this extraordinary intellectual and human symbiosis which Blücher and Arendt experienced for 30 years. I will conclude with this. The shared memory of Rosa Luxemburg's thought, life and action was certainly a very important human and political element in this union.